Daniel Naren,
I am here.
Dan Shriak,
I am here.
Deidre Hughes,
Here.
Gabe Schell,
Here.
Loretta Marshik,
Here.
Jarek Wigness,
Here.
John Sackey,
Here.
Logan Bizey,
Here.
Mitch Flanagan,
Here.
Natalie Pierce, Will Hutchings, and Chair Ripple.
Here. Thank you. We'll begin the meeting with public comment. The public comment is restricted to items that is either on the current agenda or the prior TAC agenda, which excludes public hearing items. Are there any members present today or online with us who wish to provide public comment? Calling twice for public comment. And a third time. Hearing and seeing no public comment, we will close the public comment period and move on to the consent agenda. We have 4 items on the consent agenda for your consideration this morning. We have the minutes from the April 20th, 2026 meeting, the Mandan Signalized Intersection Traffic Data Collection Q1 Progress Report, Notice of 2026-2029 Transportation Improvement Program Modification, TIP modification, and also the 2027-2028 Unified Planning Work Program Studies List. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
This is Gabe. I'd move
This is
to
Loretta.
Okay. I have a motion by Gabe and Loretta,
Second.
second. All right. Roll call, please, Tracy.
Daniel Naren,
Yes.
Dan Shriak,
Yes.
Deidre Hughes,
Yes.
Gabe Schell,
Yes.
Loretta Marshik,
Yes.
Jarek Wigness,
Yes.
John Sackey,
Yes.
Logan Bizey,
Yes.
Mitch Flanagan,
Yes.
and Chair Ripple.
Yes, the consent agenda is approved. We'll move on to the items on the regular agenda, beginning with item number 7, the Bismarck Functional Class Change Request. This was continued from our meeting in April, and Stephen Larson will bring us up to date on that.
Yes, so pretty short and sweet today, and as you may remember from last month, the city of Bismarck just completed an extension of East Century Avenue and 52nd Street. They finished construction last year. They approached us, the MPO, to request that the roadways be functionally classified. However, after a meeting earlier this month between the MPO, City of Bismarck, and Burleigh County staff, the city has decided to withdraw its functional class request for these roadways. 52nd Street is currently a township road, designated as a local road, and both city and county staff believe the complexities of securing federal funding in this area would outweigh the potential benefits at this time. I'm willing to, if Gabe or Dan have anything that they'd like to add to that, I'll give them the floor.
I guess maybe just to add, it definitely gets odd in terms of the rules that are applicable for the cities, the county, the townships as we get outside of that corporate boundary. Recognizing those complexities, it was just probably not worth the effort as we further evaluated this to continue. It was more so just to have the map show the completed network than it was trying to secure federal funding anytime in the near future. So if that changes anytime in the near future, we would come back to this board for a request similar to what we've had before, but probably more vetted at that point in time.
All right. Well, thank you, Stephen, for bringing us that update, and Gabe for your comments as well. I also appreciate the conversations that took place between the jurisdictions to kind of hammer this out. We'll move on to item number 8.
We would need a motion then to.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. Regarding the withdrawal by the city of Bismarck, is
Yes.
there a motion to approve that withdrawal?
I guess I would move to withdraw this request.
I'd second.
And we have a first and a second. Roll call, please.
Daniel Naren,
Yes.
Dan Shriak,
Yes.
Deidre Hughes,
Yes.
Gabe Shell,
Yes.
Loretta Marshak,
Yes.
Jarek Wigness,
Yes.
John Sackey,
Yes.
Logan Bisey,
Yes.
Mitch Flanagan,
Yes.
and Chair Ripple.
Yes, the motion to withdraw is approved. All right, now moving on to item number 8 is the 2026 Curb Management Study, RFP, and Stephen will present the details on that for us.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm referring to Exhibit RE in your packets. This is indeed a request for proposals for the curb management study for the city of Bismarck. This was formerly referred to as the parking needs study, but consultation with city staff led to an updated title and a slight kind of tweaking to the scope corresponding to that. So the study is in the current approved Unified Planning Work Program. It has a not to exceed budget of $150,000, and the city of Bismarck will be providing the 20% match on this. This study goal is to provide recommendations to the city of Bismarck for the efficient and responsible use of its urban curb space. For the purposes of this study, curb space is defined as the area adjacent to the curbs that is utilized for purposes such as bus stops, bike lanes, delivery zones, dining, pickup zones, parking, and more as well. The study area will focus on downtown Bismarck for certain, but the consultant will also be requested to assist us and the city in looking at additional high activity areas within city limits that may also need to be studied as part of this effort. The project will inventory available curb space within the study area, evaluate potential uses for that space, look at demand management of curb space, and provide various key recommendations. Parking policies, the recent update to the Bismarck Land Development Code, and the adequacy of existing parking signage and regulations will also be studied as part of this effort. The public involvement section of the RFP calls for 2 public engagement opportunities with the general public in Bismarck and encourages creativity in gathering input as the study progresses. Ultimately, this study will provide a creative, prioritized, multimodal range of alternatives for curb space management within the study area to assist the city of Bismarck with planning as the community continues to grow and develop. That is kind of an overview. Are there any questions on the RFP as I have it in the packet?
Thank you, Stephen. Any questions for Stephen on the RFP? Okay.
Maybe just a clarification. The study area is a mix, is primarily functionally classified roadways, but it is more of an area than it is a specific roadways within that area. Is there any, I guess, restriction that it has to be functionally classified for MPO dollars to be utilized for this study?
Not that I'm aware of. As long as it's within the MPO area, I believe that
Yes.
we're allowed to study.
So if we were doing something specific on the roadways and limiting that action to the roadways themselves, then we would have to restrict ourselves to functionally classified and kind of refrain from doing anything on local roadways. But yeah, this is just encompassing the entire area. So
Works for me. Thank you for the clarification.
any other questions for Stephen? If not, we would be looking for a motion to approve or recommend approval of the RFP.
This is Gabe. I would move to approve.
We have a first, Gabe, thank you. Is there a second?
This is Deidre, I'll second.
Deidre, thank you for the second. Any discussion? If not, roll call, please.
Daniel Naren,
Yes.
Dan Shriak,
Yes.
Deidre Hughes,
Yes.
Gabe Shell,
Yes.
Loretta Marshak,
Yes.
Jarek Wigness,
Yes.
John Sackey,
Yes.
Logan Bisey,
Yes.
Mitch Flanagan,
Yes.
and Chair Ripple.
Yes, the motion is approved. Thank you. We'll move on to item number 9 in the agenda. That is a 2026-2027 Unified Planning Work Program amendment. This is the second amendment to the UPWP. That begins on page 37 in the packet. I better get my bearings here. So this amendment was required because we did receive an increase to the overall total federal and local match amounts due to actual federal funding authorized by the Federal Transit Administration exceeding what we had estimated for 2026. The actual amount exceeded the estimated amount by $1,030.91. And so we had to feed that into our 2026 UPWP. You will see the changes that have been made. They're pretty minimal. We changed the cover of the document to reflect the amendment date. Also on page 47, and I don't know, Tracy, are you able to share your screen? And maybe we can bring that up so folks at home can also see and follow along in the packet. Page 47 is page 5 of the UPWP document, and that shows a change to the 2026 Bismarck-Mandan MPO revenue table. Accordingly, we've changed the federal and local match amounts and their respective percentages. And then the final change was an increase to our totals, federals, and Bismarck local match on our revised 2026 budget table on page 69 of the document. You can see that there was a modest increase to Bismarck's local match of approximately $258. They did not voice any objections when I brought that forward to them. We've increased the overall office operations line item in that 2026 budget to reflect this change in FTA funding. And those are the only changes that occurred to the document. Are there any questions on those? If not, we would be looking for a motion to recommend approval of the UPWP amendment, Amendment 2, as presented.
I'd move to approve.
Thank you, Daniel. I have a motion to recommend approval. Is there a second?
This is Jericho, second.
Thank you, Jarek. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? If not, roll call, please.
Daniel Naren,
Yes.
Dan Tria,
Yes.
Deidre Hughes,
Yes.
Gabe Schell,
Yes.
Loretta Marshak,
Yes.
Jarek Wigness,
Yes.
John Sackey,
Yes.
Logan Bisey,
Yes.
Mitch Flanagan,
Yes.
and Chair Ripple.
Yes. Motion to recommend approval of Amendment 2 to the UPWP has passed. Moving on to item number 10 on the agenda, it is the Basics Act Letter of Support. This item was also continued from the April meeting, brought into May. So we have talked about the fact that our surface transportation reauthorization will be occurring soon, as our current transportation bill will be set to expire on September 30th of this year. There has been legislation introduced at the federal level, and one of the more notable items is for the Basics Act. We've kind of talked about that over the last couple of months, and it was noted that it would be pertinent for the 4 MPOs to voice their support as one voice in regards to the Basic Act. However, we agree as MPO executive directors that while the Basics Act does bring forward some really beneficial provisions to our MPOs, we don't want to necessarily put a rubber stamp on the Basics Act, because by the time that it comes around and reaches any final approval through the amendment process and has gone through several iterations. It may look very different than what we're seeing today. And so what we intended to do was just to provide a letter of support for some of the very more outcome-based provisions within the Act without getting into specific programs or funding amounts. What you have as Exhibit RG in the packet on 73 is the letter that was initially drafted and distributed amongst the 4 MPOs. We have done a bit of refinement to some of the language, cleaned up some of the typos that were in the original letter in the packet, and Tracy is going to share a very slightly revised document, and what I want to show to you today is just the language that was refined in explaining what the MPOs are and what role they play. And that would be a change to the first page of the letter of support. Well, if Tracy is unable to share this screen, I'll just let you know that we refined the language to say that metropolitan planning organizations, or MPOs, play a key role in coordinating regional transportation needs across the country. They provide the technical assistance to understand long-range transportation needs and facilitate prioritizing regional funding to address those needs based on local participation and input. This new language just basically replaces a more federally mandated type description of the MPOs. It provides that bigger picture of our overarching function and role. So that was probably the most major change, and I just wanted to kind of point that out before we bring this forward to our policy board for approval. Because we are the first MPO seeing this letter, if the TAC recommends and the policy board subsequently does approve this template, then it will also go to the policy boards of the other 3 MPOs in the state. And should they approve the same letter, then it will route through like a DocuSign process to the policy board chairs of each respective MPO for their signature. And of course, this would also be going to Congresswoman Fedorchak, Senator Kramer, and Senator Hoeven. So there would be 3 letters going out. Are there any questions on, I think we're getting, is this the revised letter? All right, we lost your screen share again. That's okay.
I can see it.
You can see it?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know if it's just not.
Oh, it's back. Are there any questions on the letter of support, the intent of the letter of support, the really minor changes that were made to the language, comments?
If we're at the stage of just looking for typos and making sure it's exactly right, there is one on the top of page 75, and I can talk to Tracy about it. Long term has a hyphen where it shouldn't.
Okay.
Second paragraph.
If you're looking at the copy that's in the packet, yeah, there were all kinds of weird typos. So I think between the 4 directors and I, or the other 3 directors and I think we've got those cleaned up, but I appreciate that notation. Any questions on any of the actual language in the letter? All right. Well, if not, then we would probably be looking for a recommendation of approval for the letter of support as presented, with the understanding that it would not require a signature until such time as it's approved by all 4 MPOs in the state.
This is Jarek. I'll move to recommend approval of the letter.
We have a motion to recommend approval. Thank you, Jarek. Is there a second?
This is Gabe, I'll second.
Thank you, Gabe. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing and hearing none. Call the roll, please.
Daniel Naren,
Yes.
Dan Shriak,
Yes.
Deidre Hughes,
Yes.
Gabe Shell,
Yes.
Loretta Marshak,
Yes.
Jarek Wigness,
Yes.
John Sackey,
Yes.
Logan Bisey,
Abstain.
Mitch Flanagan,
Yes.
and Chair Ripple.
Yes, the motion is approved. Thank you. We'll move on to item number 11 on the agenda. It is the 2026 Fringe Area Roads Master Plan update with Joel Mann, Bolton and Mink. Joel, are you with us this morning?
I am. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Great. I have a presentation to share. I'll go ahead and do that. Okay, here we go. I'm going to switch this over now. Wanted to give an update and focus on some of the process parts of the plan that have been emerging as we've been coordinating this with staff. And I know several of you are on the steering committee for the plan effort as well. So we're going to have a discussion on that tomorrow morning that we have scheduled to get into details of this a bit more and talk about some of the procedural things. But what we wanted to focus on today, we had an update with North Dakota DOT staff in April that kind of, gave an overview of the technical process of the plan and spoke to some DOT questions about longer term interests in the region, especially with north-south movement and just, what our findings were starting to show in terms of some potential directions. So some good feedback came from that discussion. One thing that I'll point out here, just from a procedural, technical term standpoint, you have heard us using the term regionally significant corridors in the past to talk about a network that's going to be kind of a priority focus for the Fringe Area Roads Plan moving forward. We're changing that term. We're calling it major regional corridors now just to avoid overlap with some other federal technical terms. So, anything that you'll see referred to that way is that same concept. This is nothing new. But we are also working toward a draft plan that we're going to be sharing with staff later this month. And future updates to this committee will focus on that and larger findings over all of the study with what the draft recommendations will be. I want to reiterate that the plan has not historically been one with recommendations. It's not, an MTP or a TIP. It doesn't have projects listed out. But we've moved into more of a kind of an oversight role for the MPO with the Major Regional Corridors Network in the thinking of this plan. So there will be some ideas or some ways that these talk to the MTP and talk to other core products and functions of the MPO. So we'll get into that a bit more in a minute. Just to remind everyone, this is the overall Major Regional Corridors Network that's emerged. I would say this is still draft, and based on our discussions with all of you, and especially in your function as the steering committee, we might make some refinements to this. But I'll talk a bit more here about what it is and the significance of defining that network in the first place, because the last Fringe Area Roads Plan that's still active did not do that. It really just sets up an overall network for road additions as the region grows. So we are setting up basically two systems in this, or two networks, for what I'm calling the non-major regional corridors network, which is the Fringe Area Roads Plan, as you all know it, from past iterations. Very little would change in terms of how the roadway network gets built out with development. We're trying to promote good infrastructure to serve land development. It's a good, solid, best practice kind of growth management approach. And right now, the MPO is fairly hands-off with how that gets implemented. The cities and counties are the ones with land development review purview, and they're going through the process of looking at development applications and making sure that road network additions are mostly conforming to the plan or meeting the intent of the plan, and you're recording amendments when something has to be changed. So nothing would really change with this. One thing that we want to emphasize is that keeping data sets and GIS and plan documents up to date is helpful for everybody, and it gives the MPO more current resources that it can share. So we're building in some recommendations on how to do that and just how to make sure those pieces get coordinated if the road network has to change for any reason. But then ultimately, this is turning into capital projects when the roads get built. So very much like it happens today. But on this major regional corridors network, I want to draw your attention to these last two steps. The first three are more or less identical. It's going through the development review process if you have development that does access these major corridors. But it's those last two steps where things start to change a little bit, where we are recommending an approach where the MPO and the locals work together to understand the impact of development on those corridors and track that against what a long-term forecast would show that corridor needing to serve. Specifically, so this is a screenshot from the regional modeling work that our team worked on with ATAC. And this goes into every metropolitan transportation plan. You have a long-range forecast of growth and what that means for transportation impacts on the network. But we wouldn't build everything that's forecast to need more capacity out today in the short term. That's the purpose of the MTP, and that's the purpose of the TIP every 4 years to program funds to those projects and get them built. So, something like the Northern Bridge corridor, this would be along 57th Avenue as it approaches the bridge on the Bismarck side. There's a traffic forecast for that suggests this road that doesn't fully exist today all the way to the bridge, even on its approaches a mile away, might need some enhancements or capacity additions to serve that traffic that's forecast. But that forecast is, it's 25 years out. So that's something that development will add to and contribute to incrementally. And we don't know the timing of when development happens in every one of these locations. So what we're proposing here is simply a more structured approach to keep track of this and understand this corridor is becoming more of a priority. We're seeing a lot more development happening here. The next time the MPO updates its MTP, we need to look at this corridor maybe a little differently than we have in the past because it is starting to show change. So these are still ideas that need to be worked out in detail, and we look forward to working with staff and with all of you on these. But just ways to kind of set your prioritization process in the MTP or ways to tie back to the Fringe Area Roads Plan. We want to define those pretty clearly. So there is that link between the two documents and the MPO serving in kind of a functional partner role in this development review stage. But then the last step is another thing that we want to draw attention to, that the policy board of the MPO would have an active role as part of this. Right now, the policy board isn't weighing in on developments individually, and when there are changes to the Fringe Area Roads Plan, it doesn't usually get up to that level. We're not trying to suggest that that should happen very often, but we are trying to suggest that when you're on a major corridor, that for infrastructure purposes and growth management purposes, has this regional importance to tie areas of growth together. We want to make sure that development isn't precluding any opportunities to achieve that long-term vision. So the policy board has a voice in that to be able to say, we're thinking not just about City of Bismarck or Burleigh County or Morton County or Mandan, but we're thinking about the region together. And if development in one of the jurisdictions might be changing how that corridor could function and serve the region in the long term, we'd like to be able to weigh in on that. And what we've proposed is that this committee, the TAC, will provide more detailed review and make a recommendation to the policy board. So it should be fairly straightforward, consent agenda level. But it's something that the TAC would help the policy board to understand that if there are major changes from development that I'll just say we don't see happening very often or see as a common thing in this, you have a mechanism by which the policy board can weigh in and help find a solution that continues to work for the region. So just to give an overview of how these would work together, we've got our two networks. We have the major corridors network being proposed here, and then we have what I'm calling the typical Fringe Area Roads network, which is everything else we've been working with the steering committee and with staff directly to make some changes to this network around places where, the major streets plan from the city of Bismarck would supersede some of these, or where some of the jurisdictions are agreeing we're just not seeing the development ever happening in these locations. We can probably remove these from the network completely. So there will be a revised version of this network in the overall plan. But what each does is set things like typical section and right-of-way dedication. This is something that we would recommend as part of the fringe area plan for those corridors as an ultimate build-out. Where access is located, we would make recommendations for access spacing directly on these corridors. And then any of the kind of major connections to other infrastructure or to natural barriers like water crossings, this helps to set some context around where that happens to make sure that development isn't placing intersections or driveway access or things like that too close to those locations. And that at some point, if you're going to be taking on a capital project to do something like a grade separation over a railroad, you've kind of built in the buffers, if you will, or the long-term thinking for how development should respond to that, and you're not going to be left unable to move forward with a project like that in the future. Approaches to bridges, that sort of thing. The typical network that just kind of builds out with development, this is going to continue to function much like it does today, and it's deferring to development standards that the local governments keep up, your zoning, your land development and subdivision regs. But this is really just kind of leaving this to the local governments to determine best practice and to meet the overall intent of this. So what that looks like in terms of steps, the plan itself, the fringe area roads plan that we're updating, will set some of these definitions first so that we're not having to debate those. Those are going to get defined here. But then moving forward, for any roads on that major corridor network, things happen much like they do today. When a development application comes in, staff goes through this, technical review process. But that step where the MPO steps in to help coordinate, I'm calling it regional planning, to understand how impacts of each increment of development are adding to that corridor's function in the long term, or setting the urgency of needing to do something for improvements to that corridor. That's an additional step just to make sure everybody's coordinated around this. The TAC steps in to review any major changes to the corridor definition. And by major, I mean something truly major. If we had a development application come in and they wanted to realign, one of these corridors through their development and have access directly on it, that's something that merits that kind of review. If it's simple, we just want to front on it, we're just providing access at defined places, and there are no changes to the alignment of those corridors, you probably don't need to do much. And then that recommendation, if there are major changes, that recommendation from the TAC goes to the policy board for this approval, just to make sure the region has looked at this together and understands that the corridor is still functioning and, we're good to move forward with it. Or if it doesn't look like that's going to work, to keep this kind of regional connection, this is a place where you can work with the local development partner and, find something that does work through the review process. In terms of timing, we don't see that this really adds much to that process. There's always a concern when you add more steps that it's slowing development down, and the development community wants the certainty, they want the expediency of it. We don't see that this is really adding a lot of time. In the more extreme cases, this might take 6 months to get through, and we're going to work with staff to understand what's typical for the development process today, just to be able to truly compare this. But not that much more time from what currently happens. For any of the roads that are not on that regional network, really very little change to process. It's the technical review, development review process that currently happens with the local governments. And then the plan is simply asking, work with the MPO and let's develop a system that the plan will help define. It'll set those parameters just for how to keep all the data and records up to date. Part of the work that our team did with this plan update was to gather a lot of those amendments and understand what all is happening. And we've proposed a few ideas for how to streamline that so that the data updates are more, regular and current. It's not a huge lift. It's just a little bit to keep the process running smoothly. So that, in terms of timing, doesn't really need to add a lot of time. And this last step in the documentation really doesn't have to hold up development. It can happen after approvals, just making sure that any updates or data management are happening in a timely manner. So coming back to the idea of the major corridor network and some other topics that have been discussed throughout the plan update, you might remember when we started out, there was a lot of question about the North-South Beltway study from 15, 20 years ago, what this plan was going to do to look at that. We've really kept that for the most part, and I would say that it's most of this corridor for the overall Beltway alignment is now absorbed into that major regional corridor network. So it's still there, maybe just branded differently or not described using that term. But together, this system would help provide that kind of regional link. And one of the key connections there, of course, is a northern bridge. The southern bridge not being looked at as much today, and that might not ever happen. And that's not something that's included in our major regional corridor network, but the northern corridor is. And then the next step that we have to do to sort of finish this up with the overall plan is to make sure that we are being appropriately responsive to context and land use character. So the major regional corridors don't all look the same. These are not all one, typical section, but based on what they're serving might have some differences, and we're working to define those right now. So the other steps are what we've described here, that we want to know what the ultimate infrastructure need is based on our long-range forecast, and we want to make sure that development is being tracked along with that. But then we also want to help streamline the process so that some of these development decisions, have the guidance from this plan that they would need. So we're working to finish up a draft that we're sharing with staff later this month, like we said. And future updates, we're going to focus on the transportation hotspots, the 6 areas identified in this study that need a closer look and, more of a view toward operations and, solving kind of tricky challenges in those small areas. But then we'll be sharing the overall set of plan recommendations and deliverables in the next month and probably into July as well. So any questions that you have, we've got a lot that's working in progress, and we appreciate your support on this, and happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Joel? Gabe?
Thank you, Joel. Maybe my question is more just a comment, and I'm sure we'll further evaluate this. But when you mentioned deviations from the plan on the major regional corridors, I guess I'd be real curious about how we define that. I get that a subdivision process probably would happen, concurrently, but if someone wants a second field approach on a roadway that might be 8 miles away from Bismarck's core or Mandan's core, and it's entirely in the jurisdiction of the county highway department to give that field drive, I would hope that that's not a process that currently takes multiple months to get through. So just maybe understanding subdivision plat versus approach permit and where you would envision needing to come back to policy board for potential changes.
Yeah, that's a great question, great comment. And that is something that, as we have our steering committee discussions with staff, I'm not sure we're able to get everybody together at our scheduled meeting tomorrow. So Stephen and I are working on setting up a way that we can connect with everyone. I think we need to know a little bit more about how it's currently working, just to evaluate, is this process hugely different and, creating a lot more complication, or are we fairly close? So I think it's worth our while to bring up some of those specific scenarios. What would happen if this is what comes in and this is the request, so that we can understand how best to fine tune this.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Joel. Gabe?
I have a question that's similar to Gabe's, but so the subdivision process, which is by ordinance, what we use to really get these right-of-way dedications, it's written into ordinance, so each political subdivision would have that in their own separate zoning ordinances. So would the recommendation of the plan be to amend those ordinances to adjust the process of the subdivision review, or would it be seen that there would be enough discretion within the ordinance as they're written today to allow this additional process?
The only place where we can see anything being substantially different is if one of those major corridors is proposed in a subdivision to be greatly changed. And to Gabe's point, I think we need to define exactly what that means, and be very specific. But almost anything else, we're kind of letting the local governments continue, with their current process. It's really just, we're setting aside that regional network so that the MPO can pay more attention to it. We don't see that that would change just based on the current development patterns. Those kinds of, section line, every mile corridors aren't getting changed in a lot of the recent reviews. It's the internal streets where you're seeing some differences. And the plan isn't taking, as strong a position on those. That regional network was set up intentionally kind of sparse to really focus on critical paths and, major connections. So it wouldn't affect that many of the roads. It would only happen, that you'd have some additional discussion and review outside of the subdivision ordinance and process. If it's something really significant, like a developer wants to take 57th Avenue that is, planned long-term as that bridge approach and reroute it to the north, through an area and have it end in another road, something like that, substantially changes the function is where this would come in. I think with everything else, the current subdivision ordinances as they are, kind of doing the job and would be left to that. And we're not recommending that those need to be updated. It's when you get to this question that, all right, you might be meeting the letter of that, but the overall transportation intent of this, from a regional standpoint, brings up some questions. That's where there's more of a discussion. And, that doesn't even need to change the subdivision ordinance. It's more just, let's work with the applicant to make sure this is fitting, the overall kind of function of what we need, to connect the region.
Thank you. And I'll just follow up to say, I think conceptually this makes a lot of sense to me to align the significance of the roadway with the oversight body reviewing and deciding on that. So that makes a lot of sense. And I think probably most first subdivision ordinances have language already written in them that would give this discretion for that. But it might be worthwhile for us to review those ordinances and make sure we can do those things.
I'm not, sorry to admit this, but I'm not seeing any video of the room. But I can see that, if Daniel, is that you speaking?
Yes, it is. Sorry, I should have asked myself.
No, it's okay. I'm sorry. I didn't know if this was a technical thing and I just now noticed it. But I think we have some time set up to review this more closely later this week. And I'll look forward to that discussion because that will help us a lot to be very clear and specific about the recommendation.
Thank you, Joel. Thank you, Daniel, for your comments and questions. Any other questions for Joel? He's provided a lot of information for us this morning. Joel, I do have one question in that as you refine this process with feedback from the steering committee, will you be bringing anything formally back to the TAC and Policy Board to approve as far as this process, or is this just going to roll into the overall Fringe Area Road Master Plan final document and we approve it that way?
I think it would be just part of the overall plan. I don't know if we need to have, unless Chair Ripple, if you would like to see interim steps like this just to get I don't know if it needs to be a formal adoption or anything like that, but just to get a blessing of those, we're happy to do it that way. But our thought right now is that if we can get this fine-tuned, we'll bring this into the bigger plan and present that all at once.
Oh, thank you, Joel. I guess I feel that a pretty primary contingent of the TAC sits on the steering committee for this particular project, and so with their feedback and then their ultimate buy-in, I think that's what we'd be looking for, and then we could probably move forward with rolling it into the overall study. Any other questions for Joel? No? All right. Well,
Chair, I did just want to add a quick comment because there's a lot going on this week with the plan. We do have a couple of public engagement meetings coming up on Wednesday and Thursday of this week. Wednesday evening at Bismarck Public Works from 5:30 to 7:30, and then Thursday evening, Mandan Library from 5 to 7. And this will be our final round of public engagement meetings for the study and another interactive exercise followed by discussion on the major corridors network and some of the steps that we've taken to get to this point. So.
Great. Thank you very much for providing that. Wednesday at Public Works in Bismarck, Thursday, Morton Mandan Library. Okay. Thank you very much. Anything else to add? I'm not hearing or seeing anything. Thank you, Joel.
All right, thanks, everyone.
Okay, moving on to item number 12 with fiscal year 2028 Transportation Alternatives Program Update. Stephen?
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick note for your information. North Dakota Department of Transportation recently announced grant awards for the fiscal year 28 Transportation Alternatives Program. We did do that solicitation late last year. So out of the 4 applications the MPO submitted, we were able to get 1 project awarded funding for this year, and the DOT selected the Bismarck State Street Trail Rehab Project from Divide Avenue to Calgary Avenue. I know that the city has been pursuing this for the several years, but they did accept the project officially at their city commission level recently, and will be moving forward, and that will be a project you'll see in the FY28 tip. So, any questions?
Questions for Stephen? Well, congratulations, Bismarck, on finally getting awarded funding for that project. Moving on to item number 13, passenger rail service update. Exhibit RI in your packet, beginning on page 83, provided a memo regarding passenger rail activities in our area. The first item is that the MPO did hold a passenger rail roundtable discussion. We convened this on April 28th, and we invited local leaders and elected officials from across the region, from Beach, Medora, Dickinson, Mandan, Bismarck, Lincoln, Valley City, and Steele. Quite a number of them were able to attend that meeting, even though it was pulled together on fairly short notice. And the purpose of the discussion was basically to present the status of the Big Sky Passenger Rail Authority Corridor ID project and where that is right now, share information on local passenger rail readiness within each of our respective communities. Thirdly, to identify community needs, challenges, and opportunities. We learned a lot from our neighboring community of Jamestown. They've been pretty active in this particular arena. And then we also wanted to explore collaboration opportunities and strategize on advocacy efforts. So it was a very good meeting. We had some good discussion. The notes to the meeting were attached in your packet. And after this, I would be willing to stand for any questions on that. But in the meantime, I'll move on to the next item to update you on, and that is a presentation that I made to the Bismarck-Mandan Chamber EDC. That was last Tuesday. I spoke before the Local Issues Committee and presented the status of passenger rail service right here in our MPO area and what our efforts have been to date to prepare for its return. I presented that strictly from a transportation perspective, as that is the MPO's purview. However, it was to seek Bismarck-Mandan Chamber EDC support for our local efforts in preparing for passenger rail to our area. Their primary concern, of course, is economic development, and so they invited us back to discuss it further, but with being armed with a little bit more cost analysis figures for their consideration. And also we were invited to convene a meeting amongst the MPO, the EDC, and the mayors of Mandan, Bismarck, and Lincoln to discuss what economic challenges and opportunities might await the communities with regard to passenger rail restoration. So we do have some things kind of in the works yet, and there will be more to come on that. And then finally, the third item is the MPO's passenger rail station siting study. The deadline for proposals for that particular study were last Friday, May 15th. We did receive one responsive proposal because that is below the typically required amount that DOT wants us to see to conduct interviews. I've placed a request with North Dakota DOT explaining that we did receive one, letting them know where we advertised, how we did reach out for proposals on this particular RFP. It does have a pretty uniquely technical nature to it. It's a study that we really obviously haven't seen in our area previously, so I'm awaiting DOT's response on that to see how we move forward, whether we can actually move forward with interviews of one firm, or if we do need to re-advertise the RFP. So more to come on that as well. Any questions on any of these passenger rail items? Okay. If not, we can move on to item 14, which is our update on roadway projects for the area. Dan, are you still on? Would you be able to provide us Burleigh County's projects?
I am here.
Okay.
So currently in the MPO area, our big projects are a couple of microsurface projects, one of them being a flex fund project. We don't have schedules for anything at the current moment, so that's pretty much our update right now.
Okay, thanks, Dan. Loretta, are you still on? Maybe you can give us some updates on what's going on out in the Lincoln area?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Yeah.
We have some pretty basic road maintenance projects in the works, but we're also working on putting together some models for our utilities and updating the CIP so that we can get a better plan in place for those projects going forward from this year.
Okay, sounds good. Let's just keep
Thank
moving
you.
east with Gabe.
For federal aid construction in the 2026 season, we will have our Jericho Road Centennial pedestrian enhancements and rectangular rapid flash beacon. It's under construction now. If you drive through the corridor, I think they have lane closures up today, if not soon. So that work is starting. Shouldn't take very long to do that work. Our 19th Street and Century safety project will get going later in June once all the traffic signal components are available.
All right, thank you, Gabe. Sorry, I said we were moving east. We're actually moving west. Let's continue on to Mandan with Jared, please.
Our two active projects are our first reconstruction project. That has got the far west portion of that project is open and is being worked. The underground is being worked on right now, and that should be closed up before subsequent sections get opened up. And then the other one we have active right now is our 8th Avenue and 27th Street reconstruction project that would begin next year, but we had a public engagement meeting last week, and we'll have another one at the end of June. So public engagement started on that one.
Great, thanks, Jared. John Psyche, Morton County.
Yeah, we have our one project this summer will be our microsurface on County Road 139A, which is the frontage road along the interstate, but that's not scheduled until, I think last we heard from the contractor, be sometime toward mid to late August when that finally gets started.
Okay, they're going to make you wait a little while then.
Yep.
All right. Thank you, John. Logan?
Yeah, our big three projects are going this year. Exit 161. We're getting ready to do a big concrete pour tomorrow on the southeast ramp. And then they'll start working in the medians and replacing kind of temporary asphalt and asphalt with concrete and salt and curb and gutter. Memorial Highway is the other big project. There's two projects there. Phase 1 is moving really fast. They completed some very large mainline pours here recently. They're pouring Action Drive this morning. 46 to open at 9 for that project. And then phase 2 is also going on, mostly at the Mandan Avenue Main Street intersection. They're in the kind of they're phasing that out and they're kind of working the median right now. So the median's closed while they're pouring concrete there. To also pour the barrier wall underneath the railroad bridge kind of on that end. This week, Tuesday. And then next week after the holiday, they plan to start installing the big storm sewer line that runs from Third Street up behind Type Machinery.
Okay.
Moving along enough.
All right, well, thank you very much. We do have a lot going on right now, so appreciate all the updates. Any questions on any of those? Okay. Item number 15, other business. Anybody have any other business? Hearing and seeing none, we will call the meeting adjourned. Thank you very much.